Welcome to another episode of the I Heal, We Heal podcast. I'm your host, Melissa. Today is going to be a little different. I'm so excited. I have my first guest. So Priscilla, thank you so much for joining us today. Her podcast, I came across it when I was already diagnosed. I was in Mexico at the time and was starting my whole cancer healing journey. Ooh, I'm getting chills right now as I'm starting to talk about this. And I remember I was listening to her podcast episode. I think it was with her dad, and she was interviewing him and they were talking about his story, his background, and how it collided into who Priscilla is today. I resonated a lot with her story. I realized how the first gen story is basically the same story, different font. I remember I was listening to that episode and I was like, oh my God, at some point I'm going to connect with her. We're going to work together. We're going to collab. I had no idea what my cancer healing journey was going to end when it was going to end at the time. I mean, I was just starting. This was last fall, so it was a year ago. At the time, I was working with a shaman and some other healers to identify the root of the cancer. And for me, that looked like emotional trauma. And a lot of it, now looking at it and understanding it, was coming from the first gen traumas. That's literally where the roots were. And so, yeah, I am excited to have this conversation. We're going to let it flow and see where it goes. But I kind of want to start with how, I guess, cancer kind of shapeshifted our family dynamic, because I know that for me, it was a complete change. My family dynamic today is completely different from a year and a half ago before, cancer and everything. So yeah, please introduce yourself, Priscilla. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My name is Priscilla. I'm the creator and host of the First and Healing podcast, and I am what I call the intuitive prima. And it's so interesting that we're talking about, this topic, because it was during my sister's cancer journey and me being there for her, physically, moving to the East Coast to be there through this with her, that this was kind of birthed for me. So the First and Healing podcast was birthed a year into her journey, into her treatment. And so, yes, back to how much it shifts our families. I feel for one, my sister was 25 and I was 28, so we were pretty young when this happened. Basically, from the get-go, it was kind of known that this was really serious for her. It wasn't oh, this is not one of the bad ones, you just need to go through a treatment plan and you'll be fine. It was more so we're gonna try this treatment plan. We hope that it works. But it was in between stage 2 and 3. I guess as first gens, we're always translating for our families, And so that's one of the initial things that I can think about, is that when she was going through this journey, she had so many appointments from the start, and so she had to take care of her. And on the other end, I think I started to get involved as much as I could. I came back here to try and move out there. And then I started researching, right? What is this type? What type of treatment? What can she expect? Are they giving her the right advice? And so in the research, I recognized that my parents weren't necessarily doing the same. They were holding on to faith and praying, but they weren't necessarily looking these things up because they felt oh, I don't get it, or I don't understand it. And I remember that being a realization point for me, oh my gosh, don't tell me I have to translate this experience to them too. So I think looking back, that's the first thing I remember, is calling my dad and him being ay, sí, vamos a ver qué pasa con esto. He called it este rollo, and I'm este rollo? This is serious as, this isn't just a whatevs thing, Yeah, and it was just while I was out here, I was you should go see her. It was kind of already being the administrator. So I always say as first gens, we're kind of the admins of the home,
La secretaria.
La secretaria, calling the people. And so that's what I felt in the beginning, calling my dad, talking to him, calling my padrinos, talking to them, And it was a role that I was used to, but obviously not in this way. It was something that was deeply, deeply affecting me. And so quickly I started to burn out of that role. I don't know if you, yeah, if you can relate, or like if you had also your representative that was kind of like,
Well, okay, so are you the oldest or is your sister the oldest?
yeah, I'm the eldest.
Okay. So yeah, I'm the
Yeah.
oldest of three daughters, so three sisters.
Oh, okay.
And so me getting diagnosed, I knew that I was the one que iba a dirigir la orquesta.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so I got diagnosed. My mom was the one that went with me to my appointment. I was texting her while I was in there. I was like, "Yeah, mommy, it's cancer." And she's
Mm,
like, "Oh my God," because they had found a lump in my throat and they were like, "It doesn't look normal. Let's go ahead and do a biopsy and let's go from there." I remember we were driving back home and my mom was like holding back her tears, trying to be strong and everything. I still remember we were at this red light and then she like just broke out in tears. She's like, "Melissa, pero cómo? Like how? Like how is this our reality right now?" Like at that point I was just like, it is what it is. I don't even know either because again, like me, I've always been the type of person that's like always been the strong one, always been the healthy one. Like I never considered myself to be unhealthy or anything like that. Always active lifestyle and everything. And so for me to associate myself with a cancer diagnosis, I was like, who am I? Like, this doesn't even align. I mean, I was in my last semester of my master's program. So I remember I was telling my professors, I'm like, hey, I just got this diagnosis. I'm not sure like what the next few months are going to look like. They were all amazing. They were like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, if you need extensions, like, we're here for you. I was received with a lot of support, but I was the one that was like booking every appointment. I didn't want chemo. I do remember that. Just I couldn't accept that for myself. I still remember the oncologist was like going through the possible like side effects and like long-term effects. And one of them was like infertility. And I was what, 23, 24 at the time. I was like, I can't accept this for myself. Like there's no way. And so I remember searching up alternatives. I got home and I was researching everything about my diagnosis, about testimonies, people that were healing, that were healed, everything like that. And that's when I found alternatives. And I found some centers. I remember one in Tijuana, and I can't remember where the other one is at. But they were like all alternative medicine cancer treatment centers. But they were like 10 to 12K a week. Yeah, like you were inpatient care. And I was like, that's definitely not like an option right now. And so I was like, I got to figure out what it is that they're doing or offering, their inpatients so that I can do it at home. Because I mean, if it works, it works. And so that's when I started finding testimonies and everything of people that were healing cancer using alternative treatments. And so I was like, if it's possible for them, why is it not possible for me? Like, I'm gonna do it. And so I started with diet changes. So I remember I started a raw vegan diet, and that was the very first thing I did. This was in like February, March, and I already had like my flights planned and everything to fly out to Mexico for a year. My family was like, are you still going to go and everything? And I'm like, yeah, like that's still planned. Like, I'm going to go. If there's anywhere I'm going to be better, it's over there, like fresher produce and everything around me. And so I did it. I left in May. And so that's what I've been doing was the diet and like supplements, enemas. I was doing a bunch of things. When I went over there, that's when I got access to like more healers and shamans that were around me, just because they're more readily available than here in the States. And so that's what I started doing, was going to them and figuring out what the root of the issue was, because what I was seeing was a pattern with people that were healing alternatively, where they were attacking the root of it, the emotional root of it. And that's where I started learning that every illness has an emotional root. That emotional root, once you heal it, I mean, the illness has no reason to be. And I was like, okay, if this is what it's got to be, then it's what it's going to be. And so I started working with them and trying to identify, where everything was coming from. And yeah, sure enough, like a lot of the traumas that were the origin of it were ones that are tied to first gen.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm excited to hear more about like your story, and you're going to be on my podcast. I'm so excited to delve into it, because I think like being so young and taking a chance on alternative medicine and all of that, I think is like powerful. So, yeah, definitely excited about that. But so interesting that you were able to then tie it to emotions, because that's a big thing that I think I've weaved into like the work that I do, where it's like bringing in people that talk about like EMDR or somatic healing, because essentially, yeah, we all experience similar roots, they just blossom in different
Mm-hmm,
ways,
mm-hmm.
right? And so, for example, you mentioned people pleasing. I think probably having to be madura from a really young age, like growing up
Yep.
so quickly, emotionally unavailable parents, which I think like a big part of why I felt I wanted to do the podcast is because when we're presented with our lives, I think people like our families are like, you should be happy. There's nothing you should be sad about. There's nothing you can complain about.
Mm-hmm.
You have a home and you have food. And for them, what they're seeing is like, you have a better life than I did. You know, maybe I didn't have a home and I didn't have food and you have it. So that's it. Like your needs are met. But what they, I think, didn't foresee and we could have never foreseen is like, when we're growing up in a different country that has maybe a different foundation, we start to feel the gaps too between like what we're experiencing in our home and maybe those around us, you know, or what is available at a societal level. And so I think like that gap is like we're always trying to bridge it with our own potential or our own academics or our own, and without realizing it, like we're overextending ourselves to the point of burnout, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So I think, yeah, it's really powerful to even just talk about and connect. There's so much more to the first gen experience than you have a house, you have food, and then that's it. Like it ends there. And even I think like some families in the process of moving out here were broken. And so we didn't get to experience the version of family that potentially, yes, through poverty, like they experienced poverty, but they were together. They were united in some way. They had a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They felt the roots. And those are roots that sometimes we don't have access to. So we don't feel grounded in anything other than like on a sprint towards an American dream, right? But I think like it serves a human so much to feel grounded in something, whether it's in family and that support in community in your country. But when we're in between worlds, in between families, in between countries, I think that probably emotionally that does a lot too. That again, our parents, it's not like that they knew this, they saw this coming, no, but we come to find that out once we're going into adulthood. And it can be hard to like reconcile everything, you know, because it's like we get bits and pieces and clues, but we're also taught to just keep going, put everything down, ignore everything, keep going, work harder, put your head down, don't complain. So it's like managing so much to get to like, oh, there's something wrong here, you know, it takes a while to get there.
Okay, you just said a whole bunch that completely resonated. And with the emotionally unavailable parents, that was
Yeah.
a huge part of my healing because I realized that who Melissa was in the world was a version that came from that, from emotionally unavailable
Mm,
parents. And that's where the whole people pleasing comes from, right? For
yeah.
Melissa, that meant she got good grades, she was a good kid and everything, and she was deemed worthy of a hug, for example. And
Mm,
for a lot of people, they're like, damn, like, that's sad. Yeah, it's sad because you as a child, you don't understand the fact that love should just be. And you don't understand that
right.
love should never be conditional. It's very transactional. And for me, it was a slap in the face to realize that is how I viewed love because that is how I went into the world expecting love and receiving love and giving love. It was always transactional. It was tough work for me to break that and understand that that is not love. Love is always unconditional and is just given and received. And it came down from that is from understanding that I had emotionally unavailable parents and that did break me in a way. Then the other part of it is not only understanding where it comes from and like, okay, this is why you understand love in a transactional way, but now understanding the part of forgiveness and compassion. Because, like you said, our parents could not give something that they didn't receive or even had the notion of understanding what it was. How could they understand what, like, for example, affection is without them ever having received it? And so for them to never understand that comfort, ese vínculo, that relationship with their parents, how can they possibly give it? It's something that they never even understood. And so for me, a lot of the emotional work was also forgiveness and compassion and understanding that. And that just completely changed the way that I viewed my parents because my inner teen was very pissed off about a lot of the stuff that the inner child went through and didn't understand why. And so as an inner
Yeah.
teen, there was a lot of repressed anger, and which also that repressed anger was what manifested as cancer in my body. And so understanding that was tough, that ultimately it was me, all of those repressed emotions that I, and also that compassion with myself that I did not have the emotional ability or knowledge to be able to work through emotions because Melissa had no clue what emotions were. If it wasn't like, it was either very much like on this end or this end, and this end looked very much like anger and frustration because I didn't know what emotions were or how to process them. And so for me, a lot of them just turned to anger or frustration because I didn't know how to process them or didn't know what I was feeling. And so I think that a lot of the first gen experience is that is opening your eyes to realizing that you don't have the emotional intelligence to go on about this world and understanding it and why you are the way that you are and the way that you react to things. And another thing that you said is also the broken extensive family. I also resonate to that because you're not really from here and you're not really from over there and you're in this in between. And me as an adult now, when I see it, there was also this part of me that I had to accept the fact that we didn't grow up with our grandparents. You know, like for us, it's literally just us five here. We don't really have other family around here. It was, I think, like a few years ago, we found out that we had family out in LA. And so, I mean, that was a few years ago, you know what I mean? And so, like, before that, like, it was just us five here. And so, as far as like having tios or tias, primos around here, that was something that we just didn't have. I guess it does affect a lot of first gens if you are in the position that I was, that we just didn't have family around. I mean, we saw our family in Mexico maybe like once, twice a year. And so, like, if you really think about that, you can't form relationships that way. It was a little, I don't even know what to call it. You know, it's just like,
Yeah, yeah. I think like a couple things that come to mind is one, they echo back to you the privilege that you're experiencing, you know? Like maybe if it's mentioned by your parents or if it's like in inferred, I guess, in their in the way that they raise you. And then you have family members from your home country and they're also echoing back like you're so privileged, you have so much.
mhm,
I think it does two things. Like one, it's like it again, it makes it hard for you to look at what's missing. And then two, it makes it hard for you to like individuate, which is something else that I like to talk to first gens about, which is like there's one thing for you to be independent and there's another thing for you to individuate, which means to like question, to think of what are my own values, what is it that my own expectations, like
mhm,
when we don't have a foundation, we don't feel grounded and we feel like this is all I've got, you're gonna stick with whatever group you've got. You know, you're not gonna stand out or say or and I think like especially those of us that embody like the good hijas, right? Like the people pleasers, the I get the good grades, this is how I get
mhm,
love. I think that yeah, we internalize everything. We're like trying to figure everything out. Okay, well this is safety. So I don't want to lose whatever this is and so we don't even dare to question like what's missing from what I do have, you know.
mhm,
In addition, from when you have emotionally unavailable parents, the love from them is conditional, but then what you internalize too is the love for yourself is conditional.
oh
So you
yes.
only deem yourself as worthy or as good if you're producing, if you're doing right by others. And so, yeah, it's like
Yes.
this never ending loop. And so you're never going to get your own love fully. So you're a perfectionist, right? Because if I'm not perfect, then I'm not worthy of love. You become an overachiever. If I'm
Mhm,
not achieving, I'm not worthy of love. And so it's not only with others, but yourself. And if you want to break that pattern, it's hard because it's like, for both, it's like from everywhere. And with your bosses, you probably are the same, you know, like I give, I give, I give, I do, I do.
mhm.
I'm worthy, see me, you know. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to navigate, and it's crazy that you had to come into all of that during such a huge moment in your life, you know, where it's like it all kind of bubbled up at once.
It's just like it hits you, and then you realize because you are the creator of your reality, to realize that I do ultimately have the power to change the way that I view and see things and process things. There's a lot of power in that. I feel like when you come to that point of realization, it's huge. And
Yeah.
so I guess, were there any huge like transformations with the processes that you guys went as a family unit with your sister?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that a lot happened. But for one, we were kind of isolated. So this was during the pandemic and this was in 2021, 2022. So basically, I moved out to the East Coast. It was just my sister, her boyfriend, and I out there. And then my parents kind of like took turns whenever they could come and be a part of like what was going on. So I think for one, that highlighted the experience I had growing up where it was like, oh, where are your parents? Oh, they're working, like están trabajando. And so it's just me and my sister. So it was like interesting that I was like reliving it, but as an adult, as a capable adult
Oh.
that had her home, but still it was like I'm here and I'm the spokesperson and I'm the, in the unit. But let's see what else kind of came through as we were experiencing this. I think like how I saw it, it was a division between the day to day of the actual treatment and what was going on versus they were on a very like they were holding on to faith really strongly. Like, oh, estamos rezando, ya me dijo tu tía que está rezando, tu abuelita que está rezando. So, like different people praying, and they were kind of like maybe they were holding the ground that sense, like they were the communicators to aunts and certain people. But what happened with me is that I had this really weird experience because it felt like religion and faith almost felt like a fantasy. It kind of felt like
Mm.
it would be not like, oh, you're praying, but then my sister's dealing with should she get a double mastectomy or not? Like, and she needs to make this decision by tomorrow, and like God's not giving her answers. So like, what's real, right? So it created a divide, is where I'm trying to get to between what I felt was like the support that they were able to give and what I thought they should be doing. I thought it would feel so much more supportive if you guys were also looking at like she has radiation next. What is radiation going to look like? What are ways to support her? What is her skin going to go through? And so it felt like they were kind of like separating themselves from that experience and leaving us to that. And that's where I felt like a translator. Oh, sí, tiene un examen. I'm like, do you know what it's for? It's a biopsy to know if she has this. Like, oh, sí,
Mm.
me dijo que tiene una medicina que está tomando. It's not just the medicina, it's like chemo, and it's doing this and this to her body. And she's like, her nails are turning, like different things that were like really impactful that I was experiencing. But for them, it kind of felt like they were floating away from it a little bit. And now
Mm.
I understand, like, it felt like too much to them, is how they explained it. Like, it was just too hard for them to look online and stuff. There was also the mention of like, es que yo no le entiendo esas cosas.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was a little bit frustrating. Like, well, yo tampoco le entiendo, but I'm having to entenderlas. But like, yeah, it created a divide. I can come back to like how we were united, but in some sense, for me, it felt like as the protector, the eldest, I was like, you guys aren't doing enough, like you're not being here enough.
It's so interesting that you say like this fantasy world because I remember when I first started searching up alternatives, and mind you, my educational background is in science. Like I am a scientist, I'm a biologist.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me to get diagnosed with cancer, I understood the biology of it. Okay. I understood it very well.
Ooh,
But to
yeah.
now be understanding of that and then have to accept, like, for example, chemo and radiation for yourself, you're like, okay, hold up. I need to
Yeah.
understand because I feel like there's something more to this. Yes, I understand that typically, cancer you associate with chemo and then the whole thing because that is what is painted to you, in movies and in society, in the medical field. I get it. So like that's what I did was
Mm-hmm.
I started looking for absolutely everything. I didn't discredit anything. I was like, oh, this person said this worked for them. I'm gonna try it. Oh, this might work. I'm gonna try it. And I was literally a guinea pig for myself because I was like, chemo just doesn't sit right with me. And it was interesting to me to hear your story because it was like our stories paralleled. Your story went with accepting chemo, and mine was like, no. That paralleled, even though then it didn't with treatment. And that was also something that I want to touch on with how, because the treatment part didn't parallel, how it still created changes for our family dynamic. And for me, when I started searching alternatives, instead of my family, I guess, like being the ones that turned to this fantasy because they were like how your family turned to religion and you saw it as them turning to fantasy, my family saw me as the one turning to fantasy because I was looking at alternatives. And so like my sister is the same, like she's a scientist by background and everything. And so for her, she's like, Melissa, like, what are you doing? Like, no, like this is serious. Like this is cancer. Like you need to do chemo. Like this is what you do. And I'm like, I understand very well. Like that's what you do, but I can't accept that for myself right now. Like if down the road I have to accept chemo, like, okay, fine, let's do it. it took a lot of strength for my family to support me in that way because it was like, okay, well, Melissa es la que está pasando por eso. She's the one that's going through it. So we have to support her. But at the same time, they were kind of like side eyeing me, like, are you sure this is going to work? Has your sister spoken out about how her experience was with like having you guys being in this or the rest of the family being in this fantasy like world with it?
Yeah, we actually did an episode last summer, almost a year or over a year ago, where we
Okay.
talked about like how we talked about how it feels and what like the different realms that she was experiencing because like how I explained it to her is I felt like you were in a battlefield, right? And you're getting these phone calls of like, have you gone to get acupuncture? And you're over here like getting like, hit at, and it's like, well, yeah, sure, maybe like after I'm done with this war, like it, because that's what it felt like. It's like her treatment was so intense, and they were coming from a place of like spaciousness. But I do want to say though, here was the powerful lesson, and I think like this is where the worlds merged, is that at some point I was so anxious and like so worked up, and I think I was like so worked up that I got everyone to be worked up with me. Like I wanted everyone to be like to feel this, and I thought that it would be helpful if everyone was maybe as stressed as I was, or I was looking into it all and holding it as much as I felt like I was holding it. So I remember I had a conversation with my dad, and I was like, I need you to look up therapy and chemo and like get educated. Like, this isn't fair that you get to just be on, like be kind of on the sideline. And then my mom always was just like, well, tell me what you need from me. And I was like, I shouldn't be telling you what I need from you. Like, you should like be here, or do the things. But what ended up happening, and this was the lesson, is that then I got everyone to be just as stressed as I was, and it wasn't helpful at all. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm learning that it's a good balance, like between
Hmm.
like you guys keep your peace. If I can't keep it, at least when I talk to you, you have your peace, so I can like offload on you. And I realized too, like there is a point, like for example, when I said okay bye to her and she went into her surgery, that I started praying too. It was like that's where you lose the tangibility of what you can do, and then you leave it up to faith and like the whatever feels like fantasy, right? Which now I'm not saying like I don't believe in religion, and this whole thing was very spiritual for me, but I think like on the battlefield it just felt like they were separate then, although I know it wasn't. I know that as we've kind of rekindled and talked through it all and stuff, it's like they were just as worried as I was. They were just as like affected physically sometimes and emotionally. It's just that it wasn't their impact or their support wasn't exactly like mine, but it doesn't mean it wasn't there, if that makes sense.
Hmm. And it's also interesting that you mentioned religion and how I guess that kind of was one of the things that changed. And so I do like, if you don't mind sharing how I guess your views on religion or like spirituality changed, because for my family, spirituality, we view it now completely different from the way
Mm-hmm.
that we grew up. We grew up, in the Catholic Church and everything. And so we very much personified God, for example, as the Catholic Church does. And so for me to go through cancer and especially doing it alternatively, which meant all of the emotional and trauma healing, it completely changed the way that we consider religion or spirituality, and not seeing it in the way that the Catholic Church does, but seeing it as just a more energy based spirituality.
Yeah. So I think family wise, my dad is Christian, my mom is Catholic. They're divorced also, so they're each living in their own state. But I think like each prayed to their own version of God. And then what was interesting is that I thought like my sister and I think are more open-minded, but in the beginning it was so intense what she was going through that I feel like she had to grab onto something. So she
Mm-hmm.
also grabbed onto religion. So like she would do like rosarios and different things. So
Mm-hmm.
it was an interesting thing. Like for me, I wasn't gonna go in there and question that. I think I was already at a point where I saw spirituality, like you're mentioning, where it's like more open minded beyond just religion. But I was present for whatever version of was coming up in that moment. So if, like, my mom said, ¿Quieren rezar? Okay, vamos a rezar her way. Dad, ¿Quieren rezar? Okay, his way. And then my sister,
Mm-hmm.
¿Pueden hacer esta novena? Okay, we would do it that way. So, like, I think I understood that it wasn't my moment to change everyone's mind about it. And in fact, around that time already, I was learning about the connection of physical illness with internal emotional healing. But I felt like that wasn't the moment to bring it up to my sister in a sense. Like, people were bringing
Mm,
that up to her,
hmm.
but her situation was so, it felt, they made us feel so dire that, like, she just needed to go through what was already being presented. Like there was no
Mm,
time to question is how it felt. Basically, like for her, her tumor was already the size of like a lime, or I think a little bit bigger. And
mm.
it was like triple negative breast cancer, which is fast growing, and it was like close to metastasizing. So it was a lot that basically fear won in that aspect. And so we didn't want to question. It was just like whatever is needed, we're gonna, or she felt like she needed to do.
Yeah, so have the views on spirituality or religion like
Oh, yeah.
shifted?
So I think what ended up, yeah, that's why I was mentioning the different aspects. I think everyone felt more sure of what they believed in to begin with. Since
Hmm.
in the end, my sister now is like working again, her hair is back. She's back, right? Like she's back and she's able to live her life quote unquote normally. I think my mom felt surer about her God and Catholicism. My dad's similar Christianity. Oh, my God never fails me, right? So I think everyone
Hmm.
kind of like it was like a kind of like a confirmation of what they believed in is how it feels that it happened for them. And for
Hmm.
me, I think I never questioned why is this happening. I think it happened how it had to happen for her life, but I don't necessarily feel like, oh, it's thanks to like mis rezos or mi Dios.
You and your sister, are you guys more open to, for example, like the connection between emotions and illness? Or is that still something that I guess hasn't really.
I think for me, yes. And I think my sister's still processing everything that she went through, you know? Like, I think, like, she didn't really have time to even debate if that was a possibility to address the root of her things before going into treatment and stuff. I think, like, this is something that's going to be more ongoing for her, like reconciling, like, is this tied to emotional healing? Have to do more about this. I think right now she just wanted to get back into normal life. Like, what is that for her? For her, it was like
Mm,
working corporate and just going back into something that made her feel normal, because she didn't feel so for almost 3 years, basically.
okay. And how was it with like extended family? I guess you guys still have family in Mexico.
Yeah, I think similarly, they believed more in whatever they believed in. So, like, I have an aunt in Mexico who believes in this god of rebosos. It's kind of like the shawls or something like that that they place, and it does miracles. And so she
Okay.
went and she got one and she sent one to us through mail, and my sister put it on before and after her surgery. So like if it confirmed to her that it was like that what she believed in is real. Like I feel like everyone obviously interprets it and puts funnels it through like, oh, what I pray to is real, right? Is working. And I trust in that version of my God. So that's how I feel like they also interpreted that.
That goes for like what we place our faith in. Like if we believe
Mm-hmm.
that the trees and water and the sun, they provide everything for us and those are your gods or your deities, that's what they are. And
Yeah,
you will see evidence of it. And so just like if you personify God, you're going to see evidence of it because that is what you
right.
what you are placing your faith in and your belief in. So I think that that is also very interesting in how I guess our religious or spirituality views played parts in our family and how we dealt with cancer.
Yeah, it's, like one interesting thing that it's done for me is that to me that was huge. Like my sister's health and if she was going to be with us or not.
Hmm.
And for me, I was open to. I was like, not like, oh, well, that's not my interpretation of it, so I'm not going to do it that way, right? I was just like, I'm here to support and be and etc. I'm remembering a moment where I was talking to the moon, for example, and I was just
Uh-huh.
like, help me, this is too much, this is too intense, this is too
Yeah.
like too crazy. So what has happened with me is like since in those moments family members would enforce like just pray to God and like have put your place your faith on God, when other things have popped up now, I'm like, well, if we can put our faith in God when it comes to my sister's life, then we can put our
Mm-hmm.
faith in God when it comes to, I don't know, like this car situation that's happening, right? Or this problem that's happening at work. That same, if you encouraged me to have faith in God for that thing, which was like the biggest thing for me, then I feel inclined to know that, okay, we can place our faith and trust that everything else will also work out. Now, when I talk to family and they're like, oh, I'm stressed about this, I'm like, okay, well, that same faith that you had when it came to my sister, like you can have it for this, and like have faith that it will work out. It's like, okay, so if we have faith in this, we can have it in that. And then for me, I think like through my awakening, I had already kind of like made this agreement with the universe that I'm here to experience whatever life I'm here to experience. So it's like an acceptance that had already
Yes.
happened prior to. And so even with my sister, that's what I meant by like I didn't question it. I wasn't like, why us if she's a good person? I already understood it. It doesn't happen like it's not like, oh, it's because she's bad, right? It's not conditional in that way. So I had an acceptance of it, but I think I had accepted it for me. Like that was a new factor. It's like friends around me had had situations with cancer or their parents having cancer. And so I always felt like it was a reality, like, oh, maybe one day someone in the family. But I felt it was going to be like maybe me. Maybe one day I'll have cancer and I'll have to accept that.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't, it was harder for me to accept it for my little sister, to be honest. It was harder for me to just
Mm-hmm.
kind of like be like, I think I had to prepare myself for anything, including my own passing, whenever that happened, but not the potentiality of my sister passing. I was like, no way, like, no, like me, yes, but my sister, no, and I think that's the very internalized, like, elder sister mentality, I think.
Something in my journey from the very beginning was when I was working with healers and everything and understanding the cause of my cancer. One of the
Mm-hmm.
first things that came to me was you need to focus on yourself because that is what cancer is bringing you back to you. You have spent your life giving and giving and giving and being there for others and being who you needed to be. Okay. And cancer has brought you back to you so that you can focus on you so that you can heal you. And that's what illness does. It can be cancer, it can be anything else. But in my case, it was cancer that was bringing me back to me. And so, me understanding, okay, it has brought me back to me. I need to focus on myself. What my family and those are my loved ones were going through, seeing me go through it, was way back here. I was like, okay, Melissa, Melissa, Melissa. And so what they were going through, seeing me, deteriorate in health and physically was in the very back of my mind because I was like, okay, this is me now. And so it wasn't until the very end where the people around me, like, they were trying to be strong for me because, they had to be. They were like, I just can't bear to see you like this anymore, breaking down emotionally. And then there were moments where it hit me like, oh my gosh, like, I have been so focused on me. Like I had finally been so focused on me that I didn't see and weigh in what they were going through. And like I laugh about it now. It wasn't funny then, but I laugh about it now because that's ultimately what the goal of illness is to bring you back to you, to the point where you essentially like you can't take into consideration what's going on around you. And so that generally is the point of illness. I do remember how impactful it was with my relationship with my mom. I had moved back and I was here with my family. And I mean, I was so weak that I couldn't even like shower myself, for example. And so it got to the point where my mom was like showering me and everything. I remember how she would just like break down because she couldn't bear seeing me the way that I was looking. And that was a huge lesson for the both of us. Her and her strength and being there for me. And like you said, almost like wishing that it was her instead of me so that she didn't have to see her daughter go through it. And so that not only built up her strength, but on the other end of it, for me, it was a huge lesson for me to accept help. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but for Melissa to accept help, support of any kind was so foreign to her. up until she got to the point where she had to receive it. And I'm sure you resonate with this, like being the eldest sibling, the first gen, like you see for yourself, you find the path, you don't have a translator for anything. You find your way. And so being that, and then being put into a position where you have to accept help from those around you is like, oh my God, the first time that I'm accepting help.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand. And I can't even imagine not even getting to ask for it. It's like you have to accept it.
Yeah.
Like that is such a strong contrast from probably who you've been growing up, you know? Yeah.
And the fact that it was accepting help from my mom was so,
Hmm.
in a way, uncomfortable because that relationship never existed up until the point that I needed that help. Our
Yeah.
our worlds like rarely collided. Like we were very, very just in our own worlds, and emotionally that relationship wasn't there. It is today, and I'm very, very grateful to cancer for it because without,
Yeah.
had it not been cancer, I don't know what the reason would have been for our emotional relationship to create itself. And so, in my journey of healing all of the stuff that was tied to cancer, was looking at my family tree and what those relationships looked like, and me realizing that my mom and I were the first ones to really work that mother daughter relationship because that mother and daughter relationship never really existed, at least, yeah, in a healthy way. Like her and her mom, just same thing, like me and her, two separate worlds and rarely collide. And so
Yeah.
I'm interested in how, I guess, maybe yours and your sister's relationship with your parents changed.
Yeah. Ooh, this topic is so vast. And like as you're talking, I'm having flashbacks of different things. It's so crazy. Oh my gosh. And I'll try to condense, but I feel like, yeah, for me, it's like I was telling you before the episode started, these journeys, first of all, there's so much, right?
Hmm.
And I think we were trying to process as it went, but even now, it also sometimes feels like everyone's back to normal, back to their routine. But
Mm,
there's still so much, right? Like there's so much that came and bubbled up and all these dynamics. And like I said, I was getting flashbacks. But in terms of our relationship with our parents, let me see. There was this really interesting moment in this whole thing for me. Basically, I left my apartment here that I had here in California and I went out there and I rented a home. And in it, sometimes like my mom would come and stay with us, like let's say a month at a time or a couple weekends at a time, let's say pre or post my sister's surgeries or whenever she could come. And that meant that we would share space together.
mm,
So, like, we would sleep in the same room, and that started to create a lot of friction. I don't know if you feel it this way. I feel like in the whole journey of coming to this country, creating a better life, they actually forgot the part that we're human, and the better life was like better life as a family, better life as humans, and it. I don't know, at least from my parents, I think they focused on the material, physical, the way things looked, not how they felt. So like by the time we were adults, there was, like you said, there wasn't necessarily a close emotional connection.
mhm,
And when you experience like potentially losing a family member, I think it drops certain walls that your ego or your pride or your story, the story that you carry with you of your life and who you are and what you deserve, like it drops all of that because you notice like how fast this can go, right? This all can go
mhm,
away tomorrow. So it's like it drops certain aspects and it creates moments of closeness, I think. And
mhm,
yeah, and so interweaved in all of this, there was this like choques in between my mom and I, where it was kind of like we would butt heads. But one moment that I was just like, whoa, we're changing something was we had like an argument. We didn't talk for a little bit, and then I think the next day I was cooking and she came to me and she was like, you guys are the most important thing that I have in my life, like I don't want to be fighting with you. And this was like big because I think like in the past there was never reparative conversations between us. It was like if anything, any arguments happen, you stomach it and then you move on, right? Because there
mhm,
wasn't there wasn't that communication. And so after she came and she said that, I literally felt my whole body go into chills and I like gave her a hug and I pictured this image of like the lineage of
Mm-hmm.
how many lineages, how many generations back has this not happened? You know, has this not been the case? And I don't know if you've ever watched the show Undone.
No.
Oh my gosh. Okay, to your listeners and
Writing
to
it down.
you, I so recommend it. I so recommend it, especially because we're Latinos. It's like a realistic cartoon looking thing, but it's about generational trauma and healing, timeline jumping,
Mm-hmm.
um, all kinds of cool subjects. But basically, there's a scene in there where it's like I think it was like a miscarriage or a baby, a mom holding a baby. But basically, they show you how we get to this point of like this argument or this thing, like, and how it's generationally how things have been managed and handled get you to the point that you manage and handle stuff, you know. And when we hugged and we like made up, I felt like we were breaking reality for this line, you know, this family line, and it was so beautiful and cool and like whew, yeah, it was a lot, but it was really, yeah, transformational.
Yes, and I don't want to call it responsibility, but a lot of it falls on us to open our eyes and realize the power that we hold to be able to realize where our trauma roots are and that we do have the power to heal it, not only for ourselves, but for our lineages.
I don't know that I can paint the picture, but I feel like when it came to my sister, like it was more about her. And then when we would have time alone, because like I would be the driver out there, let's say, so I would drive them to my sister and back or whatever I was doing. On our way back, there were always deep convos. On our way there, on our way back, when they would like my dad would stay at the house or when my mom would stay at the house, I was going through what you guys now see in First Gen Healing, like all of these topics that are now there. I was learning about them and I was like living them and I was living what are boundaries? How do I set it? Like, let me
Hmm.
set it, right? Let me draw the line. Let me have the courage to speak up. And so I was like helping surface all of this stuff. And it probably was not comfy for them. But what you said earlier about like, you've always been there for others, you've always made room for others, and this helped you make room for yourself. I think because this was so emotionally taxing, I was ready to not make room for others. And I was like, this is what I need right now. I need to talk about
Hmm.
this. I need to talk about this. I don't care if it makes you uncomfortable. If you don't want to talk about it, forget it. Like, it's coming up. I'm speaking on it.
Yes.
um, and I think, like, in the past, they always saw me as like the strong one, the one that can handle things. So like they would make room for themselves, not for me. And when they saw me going through this, it was like they were forced to make space for me. They were forced to like hold back their stuff. Because one of the things I noticed being there is like, man, in the past, every time anyone would call me, it was to complain about their work or their family dynamic or their stuff. Now they're at least having to ask, but how are you? Or let's start with you. And that
Hmm.
never used to happen, you know? All the adults that I grew up with in my life that were the adults
Hmm.
offloaded instead of helped me offload. And so this was the first time where everyone was like, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should hold a little. They would still offload, by the way. They'd still have their problems to talk about. But at least now I was like, cool. Like, I get to make space for myself in these relationships too, you know? Like, I guess maybe finally I have something big enough where they're like, oh, maybe she needs some space holding too. But like in the past, mentally or emotionally, it was always like, well, they have enough on their plate. Let me now add something. I was always protecting them, even though they were the adults that should have like protected inner niña me, you know? It's interesting, like you're saying, for you, you had to tune all of that out, mute it out. Like, I don't care about your process, I'm going through mine. And I think similarly, we tried. I don't think I was perfect, but I try to hold back my process from my sister. You know, I try to show up as being there for her, but there's probably a lot that she doesn't know about still, you know, and
Hmm.
I've never felt like, oh, it's the right time to bring it all and be like this and this and this happened, you know, and as your sister, etc. Because I think like she deserves to be happy and like live, you know, she needs that. But yeah, there's it's crazy how fast your life can change from one moment to another, and it adds a level of, I hope, and I think with my family, like a level of humildad to a different
Hmm.
level, you know,
Hmm.
of like walls down. Like like we love each other. What does that mean? How do we reframe? What does it mean to be a family? You know, that
Yeah.
too. Like we've been existing in this parallel universe where it's like everyone's so busy, but like this helped us ground. in some way. I had been going through that journey a couple of years prior. Like I felt like, oh, I lived my dark night of the soul. You know, I thought I had gone through all of that. And then this came, and I'm thankful that it started years prior because when it came to this moment, it was like all the thoughts and epiphanies that I thought I had had, it was like, now live them. Now live them,
Mm-hmm.
face them,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
face all of the stuff that all of your theories and like everything, right? It was like dropped into the now. And yeah, I agree. I think like I had a lot of fear still. I had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of people pleasing, a lot that broke in that moment. So much shifts, and the whole reason why I'm on a podcast right now with you is because I lost that fear. I was like, if I'm only
Mm-hmm.
here for this blimp of moment and I
Mm-hmm.
understand deeply the I'm everything and nothing and this life doesn't happen if I'm not here. Like, so I get to experience life how I want to. And it's been kind of like a challenge of that truth. I don't know if I can explain it well, but I've challenged that truth. Like, oh, I get to live how I want and I have that much power over my
Mm-hmm.
life. Um, I've been testing that. I left corporate. I am testing, what debt really is, my money relationship. Like I'm
Yes.
betting on this realization that I've had. I'm betting on it so hard. Like I'm putting my life on it. I'm not normal to my family, and that's okay. Like, I'm not normal to my friends, potentially. I am living out my purpose fully, whatever that is. I know purpose shifts and we don't just have one, but what I felt as my purpose in that moment is what I'm living out right now. And I'm like seeing it through. Like, I'm deciding that I want a life that looks like ABC and I'm going after it. And so I'm not at the end yet. I can't be like, it worked, but I'm in the midst of it, And I think even us having this conversation is like a testimony to that. It's like in that moment, I knew that using my voice was what I needed to do. And here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, I listened to you a year ago and it's been off of that realization. Once I like was like, wow, I could be gone tomorrow.
Yes, exactly what you said. Very early on, I had question drill and everything and read a bunch and everything like that. But just like you said, it's not until you live it and you truly live out the experience and feel the experience of an awakening that you're like, oh, I get it now. I thought I got it then, but no, I truly understand it now. For me, also was that internal fight of not only do I have to be strong and heal for myself because I want to heal, but being strong because that's who Melissa is to the family. And that's who she has to be because I can see the worry on their faces and them like being there for me and trying to be strong, but they're worried. And so that was also an internal fight as the one that was going through it. You have your ups and your dips in healing, and like you are making strides in your emotional healing, but then at the same time, physically, you're also deteriorating and you're like, oh my God, like, am I taking steps forward or am I taking three back? And like, what is going on right now? Maybe your sister agrees to this, like that internal fight of like not only being strong for herself, like that was going through it, but like for you guys going at each other's neck, trying to be there for her.
My sister, oh my gosh, yeah, she was so amazing. I don't know how she did it. I mean, like, maybe you guys would relate on like how that experience was, but she always put her best face forward. Like, she did not add to the stress. She was always like in the best mood she could be, freaking fainting and then waking up and like smiling, like, okay, I'm back, like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited to talk more about like your story and your version of it because I can't imagine like what you're explaining is like you're like what I'm saying, but through your own health. Like for me, it's my life in terms of like, yeah, it's like testing this. I know I believe in it. I'm feeling it
Hmm.
beyond what I can like tangibly touch. Let's say for me, like right now, it's my career and putting that on the line. I changed my LinkedIn to escaping the matrix. That's my bio. From being like a HR professional for 8 years to like escaping the
Yeah.
matrix. And so I'm really testing this, right? Where it's just like God or universe. I felt this so strong in those moments. And now it's like sensing it beyond what's showing in the 3D, let's say, but it's
Mm.
not appearing yet. So I
Hmm.
can't even imagine that being like when it's your health on the line, like betting on something while the ups and downs are happening, while you're like, am I being delulu for really trusting in this? I imagine, like But then also the alternative is like give up, and that's also not an alternative sometimes for us. So I'm so interested to hear like the internal, like how all that happened and worked out. Yeah.
Yes, Delulu is the Salulu. Very much so,
Woo!
very much so. So yes, I am so excited to continue, I guess, this talk on your
Yeah.
podcast coming soon. I'm still like in awe that this moment is happening because like you said, like a year ago, I was listening to your podcast and I literally, I thought it, I'm like, we're collabing. I'm gonna
Wow.
reach out to her. And I'm not gonna lie, at that moment, I thought about doing it then. I felt this need to almost be there emotionally supportive in a way to you and your family because it was your sister, but you were the one with the podcast. And so I felt like that need. And I was like, no, like, what am I talking about? I'm the one going through it right now. Like, let me finish this and then I can be there for others, which is interesting because I am also like in that process now of understanding my purpose is much deeper than, just the scientist label.
It's hard to say like, oh, it was for a purpose, or maybe for you it's not hard now that you found it. But I imagine like when you're going through the thing, it doesn't matter. You don't care if there's going to be a purpose coming out. You're like, I just don't want to be going through the thing. And so like it's so beautiful to see though, and hopefully a testament to others who maybe are going through the thing and are like, there's no way that this is going to turn to something positive. I think like we get to turn it into and make it worth it in some way. And yeah, so beautiful. I'm cheering you on. Thank you so much for having me and for, yeah, letting me share a little bit. Like I mentioned, these aren't things necessarily that are easy to talk about either. Like I talk a lot with people about their hard times, but these are like the hard times for me. And so thank you
Yeah,
for giving that like a platform and a space. But yeah, thank you so much and wishing
of
you the best. I'm so
course.
excited for you.
Thank you for existing. Thank you for sharing.
Follow me, First Gen Healing.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Go ahead, share your.
Yes, yes. So you can follow me at the First Gen Healing TikTok, Instagram, and then the First Gen Healing podcast. Future, I'll be having Melissa, so you can look out for that as